Hey everybody, this is Joseph S. Samaniego, the author of the Carolingian Age book series, and you can find my books on Amazon and a couple other retailers. But here I am doing a reaction video of Oversimplified's The War That Changed the English Language, and specifically the Battle of Hastings in 1066. So let's check it out.
An online learning community with over 17,000 classes in just about anything you can imagine. Keep watching until the end of the video to learn how you can get your first 2 months for free. England in the Middle Ages. The sun is shining, the birds are singing, the children are playing in the village square. What a wonderful time to be alive. Hey, you're dying of dysentery.
Aww.
And also we're being raided by Vikings.
Yep, that's
what
all
an
right.
awful time to be alive. It's the year 900.
Yep, 900. So the Vikings are in full swing. There's not much you can do about that except to hide or fight back. Dysentery, yeah, that's a terrible disease that comes from the unsanitary conditions that were present in a lot of the towns, and especially in like military camps and things like that. They would just throw out their chamber pots or buckets or whatever they used into the street. Some cities could afford to have a guy or multiple people go through and clean it up. Others could not afford that, so they would just rely on people to clean it up themselves. Not always your best bet to rely on others. So they would just go and throw it out, and there were a lot of times there was ditches or troughs in the ground that it would go in, and then they would pour water to wash it out, and they would wash it out of town and become Shit Creek. Well, the problem was, and that's really what it was called, the problem was that a lot of people walked through that area, and you tracking it in on your feet, you're tracking it on whatever, coverings you have on your shoes, and it gets on your clothes, things like that, and it just becomes really unsanitary.
Europe is a Viking's wet dream. Raids galore. Hey, you want to go raid Paris? Okay. That particular raid didn't go too well, but the king of the Franks said, "You guys are pretty tough and scary. How about we give you land in northern France, and in return, you protect us from other Vikings?" And it was agreed. The Vikings set up the Duchy of Normandy, and then they went full-on French, converting to
And that's the birth of the Normans.
Christianity, learning the language, and making babies with the locals. England also had its fair share of Viking problems. In the 800s, Danish Vikings had conquered most of the country, but the Anglo-Saxons eventually managed to kick them out, although they left behind a bunch of Viking settlers. Now this guy's king. He sucks. Replace him with his brother. And he was like, "Hey baby, how you doing?" and had a son, and then turned around and was like, "Hey baby, how you doing?" and had another son. And then he died and no one was sure which son to make king. This one, because he's older. Not if I have anything to do with it. That works for us too. Then
Okay, so yeah, and that happened quite a bit, actually. So the king would have multiple children with multiple women, and some of them would be his wives, some of them would be his mistresses, because the rules of matrimony, even in the Catholic Church at that point, were kind of laxed for a lot of people who had the money and influence to circumvent those rules. Kings were definitely people who could circumvent those rules, and Charlemagne was a big example of that. And what would happen is your oldest son would typically be your heir, especially if he was the oldest from the official wife. So if you married, and that was usually your first wife. In some cases, it wouldn't be your first wife. It would be the one that you married and legitimized those children. However, there will still be fights because, this may be my recognized, but recognized but illegitimate son, but I like him better because he's a better warrior, he's a better administrator, he's better at this. And so there would be wars and fights. And what would happen in certain cases is, even if all the children were legitimate, the kingdom would get divided among them, and it would now create 4 kingdoms. And that happened a lot, especially in the Frankish world of what became France and Germany.
he grew up and married the Duke of Normandy's daughter and had a bunch of kids. Remember this one. He's important. Then his advisors came to him and said, "Hey man, all those Viking settlers that are living here, they might band together and kill you."
Yep, and create St. Bryce's Day Massacre and create pretty much the shitstorm for England that's going to follow.
Well then, why don't we kill them first? And so it was. This pissed off the Danish king, who launched an invasion, and the Vikings conquered England once again. Then the Anglo-Saxons unconquered it, then the Vikings reconquered it. The king's family had to go into exile, including Edward. Remember him?
And if you ever want to see kind of a kind of a historical fiction slash inspired show about that. Vikings Valhalla is loosely based on that. It has a lot of those. Starts with the St. Brice's Day massacre, and then it kind of goes into a few of the, I think it's Leif Erikson's tale of being there, which I don't remember ever seeing historical documents saying he was there, but Canute of Greenland, who was a Danish king, and a few other, Harold Hardrada is represented in that, and so it's pretty cool. If you ever want to check out that show, it's loosely based on that time period.
He went to Normandy where he lived for 30 years. He and his brother Alfred tried to return to England to retake the throne from the Vikings, but they were betrayed by the Earl of Wessex, who said, "Hey friend, I'll take you to London where all the nobles are waiting to make you king. Oh no, look out, red hot poker in the eyes. I can't see. And thus you can't be king." Edward then escaped back to Normandy. After a few more Viking kings came and went, one finally died without an heir, and Edward was called back to England where he became king. And that's where our story begins. Here's the thing about becoming a king in the Middle Ages. Often your entire country won't support you at first. You can be vulnerable to rebellions, and it's up to you to take control. Fortunately for Edward, there was already a super powerful guy who had a lot of control over England, and if Edward could get his support, then England would be his. Who is this guy? Oh, piss, it's the guy who gave my brother the red hot poker in the eyes. After an awkward moment...
Yeah, so Harold Godwinson... I'm sorry, not Harold Godwinson, that's his son. Godwin is the most influential, most powerful, the richest man in what is, at that time, the Kingdom of England. He's the Earl of Wessex, which Wessex was, in a sense, almost like a king-making earldom. If you were the Earl of Wessex, you pretty much had the claim to the throne, the best claim to the throne. And for most cases, it was the king that was the Earl of Wessex, or his heir was the Earl of Wessex. And Godwin had been able to take it. Others had in his family had parts of it as well, but Godwin had come from a background that he kind of worked his way up to become this powerful man, this noble who became wealthy through contacts and through opportunities and being at the right place at the right time, or creating the scenario where he could be at the right place at the right time, and that's why he became so influential. And since he was sort of a kingmaker.
Where Edward exiled Godwin from the country, he eventually had to give in and let him keep his earldom, possibly after Godwin gave him a bunch of gold and said he was very, very sorry. King Edward also married Godwin's daughter. Then Godwin died, and his massive fortune was passed down to his sons, who all became earls. In particular, this one became the new Earl of Wessex. Harold Godwinson was now King Edward's brother-in-law. He was a close advisor to the king, a brave warrior who had proven himself in battle against the Welsh, and in many ways he was almost like a co-king. Uh-oh, Edward got old and he's on his deathbed. Possibly for religious reasons, or maybe because he wasn't happy about having to marry her, he didn't boink his wife, and as a result has no kids, meaning there's no obvious heir to the throne, meaning
So that's really strange from a historical standpoint, because, number one, yes, he was very devout. Yeah, we know that of his fervor for the Catholic Church. However, one of the first things they tell you when you're getting married in the Catholic Church is you're getting married for no other reason than to have children. That's the only reason you're getting married, especially back then. Even now, they still ask you, are you planning to have kids? And your answer has to be yes. And if it's not yes, then they don't bless this union. And that's in the whole preparation stage. And back then, it's even more so. The church's stance on sex was the only reason to do it is to have children, basically. And so for him not to have children, especially as a king, to have heirs, it kind of makes you think that maybe he felt, I don't want this family being part of this kingdom. Or maybe he was right. Like, hey, I've already got my heir. I've already said William's going to be the heir because I like him. He's my guy. You know, he's going to be who's next in line for me. So it kind of gives some credence to the whole William being the true heir based on designation. So that, because I really think that he would have had children had he been so devout.
I'm gonna be king. He does have a grandnephew. It could be him.
Nah.
No, let's go with me. Just one problem. I mentioned that Edward's mother was a Norman. Edward grew up in Normandy, and he had a lot of Norman friends. The current Duke of Normandy was William the Bastard. Why was he called the Bastard? One day, his father was sneaking out of his castle when his advisors said, "Where are you going?" To the tanner's shop?
Said to you.
Why? To get a tan. But that was a lie. Firstly, because tanners give you leather, not tans, and secondly, because he was really going to see the tanner's daughter. One thing leads to another, and out comes baby William, born out of wedlock. Thus, an absolute bastard. His father died when William was 7 or 8, and he became the new Duke. He spent most of his childhood narrowly avoiding assassination, which probably turned him into the big balls tough guy he's remembered as today.
And some of his predecessors as Duke of Normandy were also fathered out of wedlock, I believe. That wasn't uncommon. That wasn't uncommon anywhere to have children out of wedlock. It was not as common, however, to have your main heir be born out of wedlock and to be legitimized. Typically, your main heir would come from your main wife, your official wife, and some of the other inheritance would go to your bastard children. And that was not a negative term, even for back then. It was considered the proper terminology, and it could be used in a negative sense. Like they tried to use it with William, but that was actually a little bit later as he was older. And a lot of people did that to try to, as you said, get under his skin and get influence into others to say, hey, I'm a count, but my liege is not as royal or is not as noble as me because my blood is pure and his is diluted with this tanner. And so try to influence others to follow them. And yeah, there's a story of William when he's 12 or 13 running from his castle after he's avoided these assassins, narrowly avoiding them and running out of his castle and getting on his horse and riding through miles and miles of French wilderness. And people may say, oh, well, that's cowardly. Like, no, that's actually pretty smart. That he had the foresight and the knowledge to be able to do this and survive for days on his own throughout the French wilderness. Because by that point, he's already trained. He's already ready for battle. He's already getting his, at a 13-year-old teenager at that time, especially a noble teenager, is going to be trained in warfare. And so he already knows how to fight. He already knows the better part of valor is sometimes to retreat and come back, and that's what he did.
In 1051, the town of Alençon tried to rebel against him, and the townspeople beat on dead animal skins as an insult to his commoner mother. William was furious, and he responded by, well, let's just say it wasn't pretty. That's the kind of guy we're dealing with here. William and Edward were good friends, and Edward allegedly promised that William could have the English throne after him. A decade later, Harold Godwinson even visited William and pledged an oath to him over holy relics, promising that William could be the next king of England. Although it's possible Harold only did it because William was holding his family hostage.
Yeah, and that happens a lot. It doesn't really mean anything. They swear on these holy relics a lot that I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, or I honor this oath, and then they go back on their word. It happens often. El Cid had King Alfonso swear that he had nothing to do with King Sancho's death. And yeah, he swore on holy relics, swore on this Bible. It really means nothing because what they can do later on is go to their bishop, say, hey, I did this, but for the good of the country, I had to do this, and I had to go back on my word. What can I do to repent? And then they'll give them a penance of, say this many Hail Marys, donate this much money, build a church. And in fact, William actually did something like that. He eloped with his wife to become his wife, and I want to say that she might have been the wife of another man, or it wasn't blessed by the bishop or by the pope. So after they were married, instead of going through the process of annulments and stuff, the pope just said, okay, fine, but you got to do a penance. And so what they did was they built a church in his land, and that was their penance. And so, they were healed again. They're no longer excommunicated, and they're back in the fold, and they're going to heaven.
William heard that the king was on his deathbed. He said, hooray, I'm going to be king. So now you have two extremely powerful men who both think they're about to become the next king. But wait, this guy is the King of Norway. He spent most of his life as a warrior for hire, fighting for whoever would give him the most gold. You name a place, he probably fought a war there. Poland? Yep. Estonia? Yep. Against pirates in the Mediterranean? Yep. The Holy Lands? Sicily? And Bulgaria? Yep. He got crazy rich off the back of it and was swimming in gold. Then he returned home and became king. One of the previous Norwegian kings had made an agreement with one of England's Viking kings, saying that when that Viking king died, the King of Norway would get the English throne. Hardrada felt that because of this agreement, he was now entitled to the English throne. He was also eager to go on one last big conquest that would turn him into a legend. So when he got word that Edward was on his deathbed, he thought, I'm going to invade England, and then I'm going to be king. So now we have three extremely powerful men who all think they're about to become the next king of England, and that means somebody's probably about to get hurt. Back in England, Harold Godwinson is watching over the dying King Edward. Suddenly, he comes out with a shocking announcement. Hey, everyone, gather in. That's it. Come closer. Don't be shy. Okay, so I've got bad news. The king is dead. I know, very sad. But good news. He said that I should be the next king. So, hooray for me. And, oh yeah, he said that if he once told anyone else they could be king, that he doesn't like them anymore, and they should just stay in Normandy. And also he said that no one should ask any further questions. Okay, good talk. Go
back to work.
Go do whatever it is you do. Usually it took months of preparation to crown a new king, but Harold rushed it, and he had himself crowned the same day King Edward was buried. In Normandy, William's advice...
And that didn't often happen, that didn't often happen. Usually it took months, if not longer, to crown a king, and a lot of that was because you had to get the news out. You had to get the other nobles to show up, and some of these could be living hundreds of miles away. So you got to get the news to them. They got to get their affairs in order and then get back. So you're talking about weeks of journeying. The other reason, and probably the more priority of it, was you had to mourn. You had to honor your fallen king, your dead king, for whatever, and mourn him. And there was a certain amount of time that you had to mourn for. And in many cases, and there's times in history where if the next king didn't feel that you mourned enough, they would have repercussions and crap like that. So that was something that happened here too. That would have happened in Anglo-Saxon. And then you had the King's Moot, which was basically the nobles coming together to confirm, and it was a formality at this point, to confirm that, hey, yes, this guy will be king. And a lot of that was done as a way of legitimizing the king, and also saying, yeah, we know he's a noble, he's of good stock, he's of good blood, and something like this, that would have definitely been the case. Now, obviously, Harold, coming from a noble family, probably no issue. And if the heir was the prince or a brother or even a cousin or nephew, it wouldn't have been an issue on that either. But now we have this.
Advisors came to him and said, hey, Big Willie, bad news. Harold Godwinson has taken the English throne. And William was furious. So he sent an envoy to Harold who said, William says you stole the throne and demands you immediately return it to him. Let me think about that. No. He said no. That bastard. Wait, I thought you were the bastard. Dude. Uncool.
Yeah, that hurts, man.
William immediately began gathering his armies together and preparing for an invasion of England. Now, killing a king was generally frowned upon in old-timey Europe because they were considered to have been chosen by God himself. So back in Normandy, William had to get God on his side. He needed the Pope's blessing for his conquest. So he went to the Pope and said, Godwinson made an oath to me over holy relics, and then he usurped the throne. Can I kill him? Sure, why not? So the Pope gave William his blessing, meaning William now had God on his side.
Yeah, and see, that's huge, because now the Pope is sanctioning this invasion and sanctioning this William to basically take the throne, because what the Pope is saying, by giving him his seal, and he actually gave him his standard, a flag that he could carry in, that William could carry into the battle and be next to his flag, to say, basically say, my Pope, our Pope is with me and not you. And I believe a papal envoy was there as well. And this basically told everybody in the world, especially in England, though, that Howard was a usurper and that he was not recognized by the crown or by the church and by the Pope and by God, therefore, as the rightful king, and he is the actual usurper and not William. So that's why that was so important.
Everything was ready to go. Just one problem. The wind. It was blowing the wrong way, and William had...
Yeah, so the Pope gave him his blessing, but Mother Nature did not.
...to wait with his army in Normandy, while Godwinson waited with his army in the south of England. They waited, and waited, and waited, and then William said screw it and sailed for England and got shipwrecked because the wind was blowing the wrong way. So then he decided to keep on waiting. They waited for 2 months and the wind never changed. Eventually Godwinson got bored and also ran out of food for his soldiers, so he sent them all home and he returned to London. The south coast was undefended and all William could do was keep waiting. While the northerly wind kept William in Normandy, it was carrying Hardrada and his Viking army to England. Hardrada landed near the old Viking city of York and defeated a regional army led by the northern earls, and York surrendered. When Godwinson heard about this, he must have been pretty upset. He had just disbanded his army, and now he had to gather them all together again and march all the way north. He made the exhausting journey in just 4 days, which is crazy quick, and he caught the Vikings off guard and unprepared for battle. The two armies stood on either side of the river Derwent. Legend says that a berserker Viking single-handedly held the only bridge crossing the river, dodging arrows and fending off attackers, until some English soldiers got under the bridge in a barrel and gave him the old spear in the jewels. This gave the Vikings enough time to...
Yeah, that's a terrible way to die, too. The berserkers, and Harold Hardrada was, I believe, a berserker in his younger days. At this point, you got to think he's a little bit older, quite a bit older, actually. But the berserkers themselves were the elite shock warriors of the Viking Age. These were the guys that would go in with pretty much nothing but bear skins, if anything at all, an axe, maybe a sword, usually not even a shield. There are some tales of them going in with bear claws, and they would go in and just wreak havoc on the opposing army and demoralize them, because you're seeing this guy with no armor coming in and just completely wrecking your whole army of armored soldiers, your buddies, your friends, and this one dude is just taking them all out. So it would just really be a demoralizing thing. And there's also stories about how they would rip themselves up into a frenzy, either cutting themselves, hitting themselves. There's a tale of a berserker who would bang his head against a tree until his face was covered in blood just to get his rage and adrenaline up ready for the battle. And that's what they did. And that's why they were so fearsome.
To form a shield wall, but because they'd been caught off guard, many weren't wearing their chainmail and armor, and the English eventually defeated them, killing Hardrada, and with him, bringing the Viking era in England to an end.
Yep. Still waiting.
Finally! William's fleet of over 700 ships and 14,000 men set sail and landed on the English coast at Pevensey and set up camp near Hastings. And Harold was still all the way in York. His exhausted army had to march all the way south just days after their battle with the Vikings. Harold made it to London and considered just staying there and waiting for William to come to him. But William forced Harold's hand by burning down a bunch of villages. Harold's army set out and met William's on the 14th of October, 1066, and both sides prepared themselves for the Battle of Hastings. The English were on a hill, so they decided to stay there because it was a good defensive position. The Normans approached, and the two sides probably spent a while yelling at each other. William and the Normans had a few tactical advantages over the English. The first were the archers. The Normans sent volley after volley of arrows at the English, who formed a shield wall in defense. Then William sent his infantry up the hill. The English threw anything they had at them, and the Normans couldn't break through the shield wall. Then the Normans' next tactical advantage came into play. William sent his cavalry up the hill, but even they struggled to break through the shield wall defenses. Wave after wave of infantry and cavalry came, and Harold knew all he had to do was let the Normans exhaust themselves and he would win. But then...
Yeah, so, he's on a hill behind the shield wall. That is probably the best tactic that you could have in these sort of battles. The shield wall that was utilized by the Anglo-Saxons and by the Norse, very similar to the phalanx that was used by the hoplites in Greece and what you saw in the Roman legionnaires with their tower shields. These shields are basically shoulder to knee, maybe thigh region, and just massive and heavy oak. And like the hoplites, they would cover them with bronze or something. Whereas these were just massive shields that once they overlapped with each other on each side, what they would actually do is create this wall that, as long as everyone stood their ground, was virtually impenetrable, even on horse, because if you had your spears out, those horses are going to take that brunt, because most horses at this time were not armored like you see with knights riding in these armored horses. A lot of these horses had basically just a cloth over them, or maybe a heavy, somewhat like a gambeson style cloth. They weren't always armored themselves. So the horses took a big brunt of this. And William actually fell a couple times in battle because his horse got killed from underneath him, and he would fall. And that kind of led to a lot of the confusion here. And you see these shields here, and you can see the yellow and black of the Norman shields. Those are the kite shields, Carolingian style shields that were common in Europe, especially in the Frankish regions. And now it's interesting to note that at the Battle of Tours, which was almost 300 years before this, or a little over around 300 years before this, they actually did use or maybe, yeah, whatever, around 300 years before this, they actually did use a similar shield wall sort of square formation reminiscent of the Roman legions to great effect against the Muslim army at Tours. Charles Martel did. And that was, again, another example of a shield wall that was very effective in battle. And they're very effective. They were hard to beat. And I've used them in my books. You see them a lot in the books because they're just such a great defensive and at the same time offensive tactic.
Something a bit strange happened. It's possible the Normans incorrectly believed William had been killed. Maybe they lost their will to fight against the shield wall, or maybe it was an intentional deception tactic. But suddenly, the Norman forces turned and ran away from the English. Believing they had won, the English broke their shield wall and chased down the retreating Normans, who then turned around, encircled the English troops, and cut them down.
Okay, so again, William's horse had got knocked out from under him a couple times. He went through 2 or 3 horses in this battle, and that was pretty common. A lot of times your leader would have a few, your more wealthier knights would have a couple horses. War horses were very expensive. They were trained, and they were very expensive. William's horse got knocked out from under him a couple times, and so there was this tale that, they thought he was dead. And if your leader in these battles were ever killed, your brains are basically gone because they had the tactics, they had the strategy, they had the leadership, and everyone else was scattered. And that's what happened. That's what started to happen here. And they say that William took off his helm and showed his face. He was clean-shaven and showed his clean-shaven face to let everyone see that it's him. And then they ran back into battle and demolished the Saxons, the Anglo-Saxons. Probably what it really was this feigned attack, feigned retreat turned into an attack because it drew the Anglo-Saxons off as they're going after these retreating forces. And they drew them off of the best defensible position. And we see this in history time and time again that people do this. And you do not leave your best defensible position. And that's what cost Harold the battle and his life.
Chaotic fighting that followed, Harold Godwinson was killed, the most popular theory being that he took an arrow in the eye. The English were defeated, and William had won. He was no more just a bastard. Now, he was a conqueror. At first, the English nobles were reluctant to make him king, but William burned down a few more villages, and the nobles eventually gave in and offered him the crown. As he was coronated, the local villagers in Westminster let out a cheer of support, but William thought it was a riot, so he burned down the village. William then had to go on a long and costly campaign of quelling rebellions and burning down villages all over England to force the people into submission. And England went through a massive transformation under its new Norman rule. English nobles were replaced with Normans. They built castles and grand cathedrals, but one of the most interesting...
Okay, and so those castles, we've talked about in other videos, the Norman-style castle was very different from the Anglo-Saxon in that they were stone and not wood. Most Anglo-Saxon fortifications and castles were built out of wood, and a lot of that was because that's what you have a lot of in England. You know, you have a lot of forest, and so you could build a lot of wood. And they would do the modern Bailey style, and they would plaster it a lot of times with this white plaster to make it look like stone, but it was still wood. And what William did and Normans did was they built a lot of stone keeps like this. Like Tower of London is probably the most famous, and it's a traditional Norman style. But another one that they would build was a shell keep, because a lot of these mottes that had been built up on the ground could not take the weight of stone like they could with the wood. So they either reinforced those and built bigger castles on top, and I think Rochester has a castle similar like that, or they would build this other style of keep, which was a circular keep, but it was called a shell keep. And this shell keep was hollow on the inside, so only the outside was actually stone, and everything else on the inside was still wood. And that kept the weight distributed a lot better, but it also kept the weight lower than a full stone keep.
Interesting changes occurred within the English language. The Normans brought their dialect of French to England, and it merged with Old English in ways we still live with today. First of all, the Normans were obviously the ones in power, so words related to power like government, judge, castle, and crown come from the Normans. Words that are considered posher or more refined are usually the Norman ones. At first, the Anglo-Saxons probably weren't that friendly to the Normans, while the Normans likely weren't that amiable towards the Anglo-Saxons. An Anglo-Saxon might come into a room, but a Norman would enter into a chamber. An Anglo-Saxon might buy themselves a shirt, while a Norman would purchase a blouse. Normans. And while that filthy peasant's new shirt may be fair, the Norman blouse is absolutely beautiful. The Normans actually considered some Anglo-Saxon words so crude that I can't even say them on YouTube. But there's more. Ask an Anglo-Saxon what job he does, and he might respond with some low-level trade, such as a baker, a miller, or a shoemaker. But a Norman has a skilled trade, like a painter, a tailor, or a merchant. The Anglo-Saxon
And let's also remember that in like about 400 or 500 years, those lower trades of baker, shoemaker, tailors, those merchant trades are going to, especially in Italy and continental Europe, are going to be the elite class. Not quite the ruling class, but the elite class, because that's where the wealth and money is going to be. They started a lot here because now they're developing their money. They're husbandrymen, and they're people who have this. They're considered citizens more than they're considered serfs, or more than they're considered just regular peasantry. They have a little bit more rights, so they have a little bit more way of gaining money, and they develop into a class of their own not too much longer after this.
Farmers working in the fields owned many cows, pigs, and sheep, but once they were served up in a Norman banquet, they became beef, pork, and mutton. And written English changed too. Since many Anglo-Saxons couldn't write, the written language was romanticized. Your annoying friend that says cool whip might just be speaking an Old English dialect, as the Anglo-Saxons originally wrote it when, where, and what, but the Normans swapped the W and H around, and the long English A vowel sounded more like an O to the Normans, so you can thank them that you live in a home, not a ham. Hey, fun fact about William, the man couldn't read or write, not in French, not in English, not in anything. Well, what if I told you there was a place where you could learn French, English, even...
So now they're doing their sponsorship. Okay, so William not being able to read or write in any language is kind of interesting. I might have to look at that, because I would imagine he could do Latin. That was one of the major court languages of the time period. And I guess being able to speak it and read it and write it is always two different things. So that'd be interesting to kind of look up. But yeah, so that's basically that in a nutshell. I hope you've enjoyed it. Remember, you can catch my books, The Legends of the Carolingian Age, at Amazon and a few other retailers such as Barnes & Noble. Scorned has just come out. But if you want to go ahead and just like and subscribe for more videos, I plan to do some more reaction videos because these are fun. Check out the original content. Check out Oversimplified's content. They're hilarious. They add that humor with history, and it works out really well. But until next time, just like and subscribe so you can keep in touch. And take care.